how to prioritize self-care in your life and what your journey has been with that. That's what your work embodies. And we'll get into that as we go along. But talk to me about your journey with that, how you got here.
Wow. I would say that it's certainly an evolution. Like I think what I have learned is that self-care is an evolving practice, especially these last 3 to 5 years. So I've been on this journey for a long time. I started practicing yoga when I was in college, when I was 18. I had a sister who worked with Deepak Chopra. I nannied for somebody who studied with Baron Baptiste. So at a young age, I was exposed to meditation, to very deep yoga practices. I got my yoga teacher training in my 20s. And so, and now I'm in my late 40s, mid to late 40s, right? So I have been on this journey for a long time. Yes. And certainly the things that worked for me in my 20s and 30s are not what works for me now, right?
Yes.
And even things that worked for me 5 years ago are not the things that are fully resonant today. And so this practice of continually checking in and continually coming back to your center and your source to say, okay, does that feel good? Do I feel more expansive? Am I more aligned? Am I more on target? And it is a constant evaluation, not in a tiresome way, but in a refinement kind of way. And so yeah, I would say that process is an evolution.
I love how you spoke to its seasons. And so I think sometimes self-care can become, and I've talked to other guests about this too, because I'm guilty of it. Self-care can become a checklist item. And if you're getting through your self-care and you're not feeling cared for, if you're just feeling I checked that off the list, but you're not feeling any sense of relief, calm, comfort, care, it's time to take a look at that and reanalyze, and that's okay.
It is okay. And I think what I really like to do, especially with my clients, is really reframe self-care as self-nurturing, right? How are you feeding yourself? How are you inspired? How are you restored? Not just the things that everybody's oh yeah, well, I took care of myself because I did X, Y, or Z. But what are the things that make you more you, right? What are the things that make you allow you to show yourself how much you love yourself and you appreciate yourself, right? What are those things and how do we incorporate those things into self-care? Right?
I love that. That's so good. Thank you for that. Oh, and sit with that for a minute, ladies, because I think sometimes we don't know the answer, and that's okay too. Don't be afraid to sit with that and try things, but think about that. And this kind of, we'll get to this at the end, but one of our things that we always wrap up our podcast with is those 5 activities that nourish you. If you don't know where to start there. That will tell you a lot about what it is you need. And then you can take it from there. And it's okay to even talk about that each day, or write down those things each day. But thank you for that. Thank you for that. Such a good reminder. Confidently setting boundaries. I mean, you are a busy person. You have a lot going on. And I think sometimes when we work in this world where we're talking to people, to women about taking care of themselves, sometimes we need the reminder more than anybody else. I always laugh about the fact I do this work because I need it to tell myself these things every day on a regular basis. Has that been your experience, or are you just way ahead of me in that?
No, I mean, everything that I teach, I learn a lot of things, right? I've tried a lot of things, and I try all of those things because I decided very early in life that I was going to choose a happy life and I was going to learn how to be happy, right? That was going to be the priority. And so that means that I've experimented with a lot of different things. And so what I teach what I know works. Right. I know that it works on me. I know that it works on my clients and the people that I work with. Right. And so those, so in that, you have to set boundaries. You have to create space to try,
Yes. Yeah. No, absolutely.
And so a lot of times, especially when you're trying to figure out what lights you up and like what you're truly passionate about and what your heart just gets like expansive and excited about, right? You have to give yourself room to play or try or experiment. And, not everything's going to work, and that's okay. That's what creating more space in your schedule, in your week, in your time to make your passion a priority. And you may not know what your passion is. So it may mean that you have to find it. And that's still making it a priority, right? I think a lot of times people like stop before they even get started because they're like, well, I don't know what I'm passionate about, or I'm not really sure. And so then they just don't, They're like, well, I have to wait until I have my passion. I'm like, well, you're not going to find your passion unless you go like try some stuff
until you actually go find it.
Yeah, like you have to feel it, and if you don't do it, chances are you're not going to feel it.
Right.
So yeah, I would say that has been really important for me, is to set those boundaries and to experiment and create space for that experimentation. And certainly I would say when I first started my business, having boundaries was very challenging. I had a brick and mortar business. That's a 24/7 job, really. And so it took me a long time to figure out how to set boundaries in a way that worked. And that didn't look like the way other people set boundaries, right? Like carving out things in the middle of the day, setting aside, figuring out the pattern that worked for me. And over time that has changed. Certainly, especially as my business has evolved. Now it's all online. And so for me, setting boundaries is really about taking the time that I need for downtime and having my schedule and my marketing work around that so that it flows more with my energetic patterns.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a really good point too. I mean, and I've had this conversation before with Valencia San Luis, where she talks a lot about your cycle and your monthly cycle and how you have each week is different. The cycle isn't just about when you're bleeding. It's also about the energy that you have in different times of the week. So there might be weeks that you are more creative. There might be weeks you're more productive. There might be weeks you're more like direct. I mean, all those things too. So I'm glad you brought the energies piece up, because I think we have to pay attention to that.
Yeah. And the other part along those same lines and in that same vein, an area that I'm really exploring now is not this idea, but the actuality of feminine structure, right? And so oftentimes we think of boundaries as these really like kind of rigid structures. Like even the word boundary feels like wall.
It does. It does. It can feel like, a lot of times I try to put healthy boundaries in front of that, because we can't fence ourselves or wall ourselves off from everything either.
Yeah. And so when we think about, and we think the same thing with structure, right? Like boundaries and structure have like, are very similar in our lexicon. And yet if we look at the way nature provides boundary and structure, it isn't the way we think of it in the Western world, right? Like if you think about Hawaii as a volcano, right? And like Mother Earth creating an island, it's layer by layer, and in a process that takes a while and may not initially look like it's going to hold life, right? Like it's rock. But then over time, it's the most nourishing thing being for a diverse population, right, of plants and animals and life. That's a different kind of way of thinking about structure and boundaries.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And even if you think about like our cell boundaries, like our cell boundaries, there's semi-permeable boundaries that are like buoyant, know, they're like lipids that are buoyant. And they let some things in and they keep some things out. And that changes depending on what the cell needs.
Sure.
Right. And so if we can start to shift our boundary and structures into things that are more of this kind of natural feminine nature of permeability, of buoyancy, of layering, then how we operate with boundaries and structures is different, and it opens up like how we do boundaries, how we do structure, right? Like it doesn't have to look like the military.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be so rigid. It stops feeling rigid and starts feeling freeing.
Yes.
Yeah. So. Well, and I think about those are such good examples. I love those. I've never heard those before, and they're really profound. And it makes me also think of seasons. Like you're only going to get snow in these seasons, and you're only going to get 95 degrees unless you're, if you're living in an area with seasons, obviously. Yeah. But seasons are the same way too. But within that, there's so much growth and vibrancy. And even when things in the winter and fall, when things are changing, it allows time for those things to re-energize again and rest and be ready for it to spring out. So, I think there's so many examples within that can feel really freeing rather than rigid. Your work is really about all of this, but taking care of our emotional health as much as our physical health and mental. You and I know those things are tied. And that's what drives us to do what we do. So talk to me about your realization of that, seeing that connection, how that has come to be in your life, in your work.
It is such a rich and long conversation. So really for me, breath work was the practice that brought that realization to a very deep understanding. And then the work I do with the biofield tuning forks gave me actually like precision understanding of how the feelings and the physical interrelate. So breath work, because it works in the energetic field, right? Because breath is energy. And so when you do breath work, you're moving a lot of energy. And so the stuff that starts to move is the stuff that's stuck, right?
Yes.
And so those are suppressed and repressed emotions. And so through that process of really becoming a breathwork facilitator and using breathwork as one of my main practices, I could see the emotion come up and the pattern come up and where it linked in my body and in my energetic field and kind of in my timeline of life and history. So those started to become very clear. And when I started to work with clients in depth with breath work, those stories like would come out in it just became so clear that the link between the suppression and repression of emotions and your mental and physical well-being, right? That if you were suppressing, 9 times out of 10, when I talk to people who have anxiety, I'm like, anxiety means that you have a lot of suppressed and repressed emotions, that you are going to have to move that energy and feel that energy so that anxiety is, then you have the real emotion instead of just the anxious energy.
I am exhibit A. That was me at age 50 when I hit the wall and realized, whoa, there's some stuff to unpack here. But that describes it so beautifully.
Yeah. And people that I work with, lots of times the anxiety is so frightening because they don't know where it comes from or what it's related to. And so much of the fear around it is not like understanding where it's coming from. And so when they can start to breathe and feel and allow themselves to sink deeper into the feeling, then they're like, oh, this isn't just anxiety. This is like anger, or this isn't really amorphous. This is rage, or this is sadness or grief or whatever, shame, whatever those big bucket emotions that just seem so frightening. You can't really face them. Breath work as a tool for me and for the people that I work with is the number one way that I support people in moving through those emotions and really regulating the nervous system to allow yourself to feel them. Because the breath, if emotions are a wave, they are a waveform, right? So they build, they crest, they fall. This is a natural waveform expression of emotion. All emotions are in that form, right? And it's easiest when you watch kids because they can move through the waveform very fast. Super, super fast. And so you can see them, like you can see the emotion build, you can see it crest, and then you see it fall and then move on to something else, right? But as adults, because we have this pattern of suppression and repression, right? We just stay at like the building point, right? Like we like feel it and then we suppress it. And then so you just stay at that bottom of the wave and you never let it fully express. And so that's where like the anxiety and the pressure comes in and the dysregulation of the nervous system, which leads to all the physical and other mental, emotional issues.
Wow. That was beautifully explained. Thank you so much. Because it gives like the science to it, the nervous system part, because we all know, I mean, at the end of the day, the body stores it up. And, the book, The Body Keeps a Score. It's true. It's true. And if you do not release it and you don't have a mechanism for that, it will get you. So I love that you spoke to, and the breath, because that's something everybody can do.
100%.
It doesn't cost you anything other than just taking the time and being willing to sit and do it. But it's attainable.
It's attainable.
Which is empowering.
Yes, I find it very empowering. And once you have it, you have it. It is yours. You were born with breath. You're going to leave with the breath. So, you getting curious about your breath and you learning how to use your breath as a tool, that is just so potent and powerful. And the beauty is that because breath is moving energy, right? That is actually our way our system processes energy. Then it doesn't matter. You can pair breath work with every single modality out there, and it's only going to enhance it, right? It's only going to deepen your understanding. It's only going to deepen your experience because, the breath is that link and the breath is that mechanism. And so the more you learn about it, just the more your life expands.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And again, people, embracinglayers.com. She's going to have sources there that you can go to and learn more about this. If breathwork is not something you're familiar with, I've been using it in different ways for the last 3-4 years in my own life. And it is powerful, especially if you just have like 2 minutes. Like I had a practice where I was dealing with a lot of anxiousness and I was in therapy and things were starting to come up and different things were triggering me. And especially in my work situation, because I had a lot of things going on there that were similar to what I was experiencing as a young kid in just the environment. And so I was taking, so those triggers came up. So I had to be mindful of that. And I would stop and for an hour, every hour, at the top of every hour, I set my alarm. I would stop and do 2 minutes of box breathing just to reset my nervous system and just be mindful of the fact that these were triggers because of I was able to make the connection of where it was coming from, but I was in the middle of my workday. I didn't have time to go and do like an intense, cardio workout that might help me release it, but I can breathe. And there's so much power in that.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great example.
How we can support ourselves and other women in living unapologetically. You talked about early in the self-care piece of that loving, doing things to show yourself you love yourself well. How did you get there? Because that's very powerful and it's contagious. When when someone sees you living that way, they want to know more about it too. And it extends a hand, it gives permission, it's welcoming. It's not just, we have such a scarcity mindset as women. We've been duped by the culture that there's not enough room for all of us, that somebody else's successes mean there's not room for our successes, when it's the opposite. It actually opens the door. And living how you live really is a very open door environment. So anyway, you can tell I'm really taken up with all this. I've talked enough. Talk to me about that.
I'm like, wait, go back to what I'm talking about, living,
how we can support ourselves and other women in living unapologetically.
It starts with you living unapologetically, right? And so, you asked how I got there.
Yeah.
The truth is, how I got there is really being honest about the ways that I hated myself. So, and that was, that's really hard to admit to yourself, right? I'm in this industry, I want to live a joyful life. I'm committed to being a happy life. And so to be honest about the actions that I take, the people that I'm around, the habits that I have that actually are a form of hating myself and diminishing my own light and diminishing my own power. And, as women, what I saw as a woman, what I saw is that we do it. I did it. I see other people do it. Very subtle ways that we just have learned to just brush off, it's not a big deal. Oh, they need to feel better, or it doesn't hurt me that much, or it's not that big of a deal. I don't really want to do that anyway. Or however, those miniature ways that we diminish our own desire, dim our own light, right?
Oh, yes, that's so good. And it's those little things build up and they become big things. They do pile up over time as we store them up.
And then we just get in the habit of being dim, right? At the end of the day, we don't have that practice of validating our own desire, and that is, you validating your own desire is the most important thing, because if you don't do it, it's not going to go anywhere in the world. And that's how we live an expansive life, right? You were given desire, right? Yeah. You were given passion, right? And you're given it for a reason so that it can drive you to be who you are and live your purpose in the world, right? And so your desires are really important and really essential in living your purpose. Right. And we need you to live your purpose. You are here to live your purpose. And in this moment in time, it is just so crucial for you to live your purpose because we need you there, right? We need you in your power. We need you in your passion. We need you in that place. And so, the more I can do to encourage you, help you, support you, and validating your own desire, accessing your own desire, having the courage to choose your own desire, that's going to lead to a different kind of world. And that's the kind of world that I'm excited to be a part of and be in.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, that was really good. Thank you so much for that. Setting and coming back to your why and your values and everything you do and how that guides you.
Yeah, it's essential, actually. It guides me in everything that I do. So I just got back from leading a retreat in Costa Rica. And I had led a retreat in Costa Rica in 2019, and it was great. But I was like, oh, maybe I should do this different area of Costa Rica that's like more popular or touristy, or maybe it's easier to get to, yada, yada, yada. All the shoulds, right? Should do it here. This is should area. And things just weren't working out. Like I wasn't finding the right place. It wasn't landing. And so I went back to my why, and I went back to my heart and like why I wanted to do this, why I do retreats. And then it was all became super clear. Like I knew I had to go back to the same area of Costa Rica because that is the area for me that just speaks to life and more life, and just has these lessons of abundance, of the way we are designed and meant to live, and all these examples of feminine energy and feminine structure. And so I was able to find this retreat center that, again, like I went through loads. I called so many places and I talked to so many retreat owners. And this place, I was like, okay, these people are living the value that I'm aligned with. This is the concept that I want to share. This is the message of how this retreat is going to be. And I am so excited because the retreat was amazing. The space was more amazing than I could ever imagine. It was perfectly in line, and just a wonderful way to show people, like have people have the embodied experience that there's a different way to live, right? That, you can have more and more, right? That life is designed and meant to be abundant, that life is designed and meant to be beautiful,
yes.
And so to be in an environment where you can see that and feel that and experience it and be around it is very powerful. And so, but that only happened because I kept going back to my why. Right?
Yes. You had that guidepost.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and
Absolutely.
I could feel it to the name of your podcast, right? Like I could feel the why and the yes, right? Oh, right. That's it. Oh, right. That's what that feels like. Oh, right. That's what this is. Okay. So that really happens by learning the language of the body, right? To the point that you spoke to earlier, right? Understanding the information that your body's giving you, that your emotions, that your energy system is giving you. And that only happens after you kind of begin to understand the layers. Right? That you get more and more curious, that you don't just have the layer of anxiety, right? Like you can settle all the way in and like, oh, right. That's actually my energy. This anxiety, that's not my energy.
Oh,
right.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I like how you separated that out, because I think we sometimes identify ourselves by these things. And, I've learned to say, I don't say I have anxiety, or I say I feel anxious. I feel that. It's not who I am. It's not one of my character traits. I feel that. So thank you for separating. I think that was a really great separation. Also, trusting those feelings and trusting the intuition. We are told not to trust ourselves from a very young age. As young girls growing up, we're told in various spaces, whether it's school, our faith spaces, our homes, whatever it is. And that's actually, no, those intuitions are there to help you and guide you. Trust them. You were given them. They are part of you, and they will not lead you astray. And sometimes it can be scary because it may be going against the narrative that you're hearing, and people and places and systems use fear to try to keep you from trusting yourself. But if you do, and it will guide you and direct you, but that can be a tricky one because that's not what we've been told.
It's true. And it is a practice. Like the learning to trust your intuition, it's definitely a practice. But the more you practice it and the more you feel it and the more you use the tools, the more you come into using it as a skill. And so that's the part that I really get excited about working with leaders to cultivate intuition as part of your toolbox, as part of your skill set. And it can happen and it does happen. So, and everybody has intuition, right?
Yes.
Everybody has the ability to receive in information, it beyond just like reading and like hearing a podcast, right?
Right.
You have these other ways that your system receives an information and communicates to you. And so you learning how your system operates and that receiving in of information helps give you the capacity and gives you the courage and the strength to begin to trust it more and more.
Living out of your own expectations versus others. Talk to me about your expectations journey.
Oh my goodness. This one is probably one of the hardest ones, to be honest with you, right? I started my career in investment banking. I went to business school, like the expectations of how you run a business, what's successful, who's successful, what kind of outer markers of success look like. And the truth is I've never, even though I have been indoctrinated into that world, those really were never my true drivers. And those aren't really the things that truly make me feel successful. And so it is quite a journey to start to develop and not only develop, but really own what your success is for you, and because there's so much judgment around success. Your own,
yes.
There's certainly other people's judgment of your success, but what I find is that I have more judgment around my success than anyone else does.
Yeah,
right?
We tend to be harder on ourselves than anybody else is.
Yeah. So that one, that it's actually one of the deep practices of learning to love myself more, right? Is, being upset at myself or not recognizing things in my life as successes, was a way of diminishing my own gifts and what I'm bringing into the world. So that for me is actually a pretty deep practice and ongoing, right? Like,
sure, absolutely. There's always something else it is that we're having to kind of combat or deal with or walk out. I mean, that's why when I started this, I was like, we're going to introduce people by our character traits because we define who we are, our identities, whether life is good or bad, by the things we do or by the things we're known for, what we produce. And we are valuable as we are showing up in the world, whether it's sitting on the couch all day or, doing the work that we're doing, anywhere in between. So these things do not negate or add to our value. Now they may negate or add to the quality of our life and whether we're living out of our passions or not. But yeah, I think that's so much of what we decide. And so getting comfortable with who we are, knowing that those things will ebb and flow, life will ebb and flow, but they don't, no matter how they ebb and flow, we are solid in who we are.
Yeah. It's so, and that brings a level of comfort and safety.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
When you're solid in who you are, there's so many things that just fall away. That you just don't have to worry about anymore.
Right. It just relieves the pressure. Talk to me about accepting the layered aspects of ourselves, all those parts that make us who we are, not just the shiny parts, but all those seasons, all those decisions. I have discovered, in this journey that I have got to get okay with my layers, whatever that looks like. Sometimes it's just accepting and acknowledging. It doesn't have to be loving them, but it can't be hating them or trying to stuff them or keep them a secret. I've got to get to a place where I can at least be like, that happened. And, it was based on what I knew at the time, it's the best I could do. Or I learned for that mistake and I won't do it again. But that can be really hard. There's so much shame and discomfort that comes up with that. So that's my personal experience. So talk to me about your layers journey and what that's looked like for you and how that plays out in your life and your work.
Yeah. I mean, for me, that it's the great self-acceptance, right? Like how you love yourself more is accepting all of that, right? Like accepting, I'm not going to get it right all the time. 100% not going to get it right. I'm not going to say the right thing all the time, but I have the ability to reflect. I have the ability to come back and make amends, right? I have the ability to do things that allow me to come back to a greater place of wholeness. And I really learning when those places of discomfort arise, or we recognize them, or those moments of shame or disappointment or not feeling good about yourself come up, right? Having the tools to come back and be like, okay, well, what is that really about? Because I know that's not my true essence, right? Like I know in my heart, right, I'm a joyful person and I know I'm a good person and I know I'm on the right path. So what's that shame really about? What's that sadness really about? Right. And
what's
so
it rooted in?
Yes. And so having the tools and the awareness to allow myself to sink in and get even more curious about what that is, to understand what I need to unwind, what's still stuck, what's still not aligned, right?
Yeah.
And bring it back into alignment.
Well, and you said something earlier, it was really important. I think when you were describing your character traits as non-judgmental, and I think that goes nicely with curious. If we can be less judgmental of ourselves and more curious and give ourselves a break and just let's get curious about where these things come from and take the judgment piece away.
Because, you're here, right?
Yeah.
You were created,
Right.
The creator is not going to put you here if you're not meant to be here.
Right.
And the creator is not going to withhold from you so that you can't be what you're meant to be. Right. Like, just from a logical perspective.
Right. If you just want to get really basic about it.
Yeah. And so if you accept those, just for me, from a logical perspective, okay, I am here. This is a fact, right? Okay, I'm here. So I'm here for a reason, right? That this isn't, it's not a mistake that I'm here. There's purpose. And so let's understand, let's let go that there's shoulds and shouldn'ts.
Shoulds and right. You gotta get rid of the shoulds, woulds, coulds, need, never, whatever. Yeah. Those absolutes.
You are here as you are in all your, faults and all your gifts and all your beauty and all your sadness. You are here and you are you, right? So there's nothing wrong, There's just more of you that may be able to come forward.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And you just uncover another layer and okay, we'll heal that and that will expose some new parts to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that depth just expands,
yes.
And I talk about that as increasing your bandwidth, right? Increasing your emotional bandwidth, increasing your capacity. The more non-judgment curiosity that you can hold, the greater your bandwidth for life becomes.
Yeah.
If you're not very curious and you're very judgmental, your bandwidth for life is quite small. There's only this, your lane is only this big, and the more curious you get about yourself, the more curious you get about life, the less judgment you have around it all, the more life experience you get, you know, and that's beautiful. That's the richness fabric of life, is this beautiful, expansive life experience. And as humans, we are able to experience so much.
Yeah.
It's
If we allow ourselves to.
If you allow yourself, right? If you can step into it, if you can open up to it, there's just so much more of life that you can have as a human being, you know? And that's the kind of gift, and that's like the fun and joy that is exciting to me.
Yeah.
But that only happens when you can open up and get curious about these things that shut you down, right? If you want that level of openness, then you have to be able to look at the ways that you shut down and close yourself off to it, right?
Yeah, and I think that's what gets people in trouble. They're unwilling to sit in the discomfort. They're unwilling to face those things because it can be scary. It does take courage to do this. I mean, when people engage with our work, and we talk about this on our website. This is an engagement podcast. Our blog writer each week puts ways to engage with each episode. This is not for someone who's looking for the quick fix, but I can tell you, and you can tell people through this work, I've looked, if you're willing to get uncomfortable and sit with it and dig into it, it is worth it. It is worth it. It makes more room for when you live in a narrow expanse of lack of curiosity and judgment, it makes so much less room for the joy and the love and the freedom. Than if you're willing to just sit and be curious, but you got to be willing to sit in the discomfort.
You do. And that's a practice. So, and that's where I find breath work is really important. So, you know, as a therapeutic yoga teacher, learning, you know, yoga, in my opinion, one of the greatest benefits is one, learning to listen to your body and hear what your body is communicating to you. But two is how you breathe in discomfort, right? Like how you are uncomfortable, you can breathe and the discomfort changes.
Yes.
You know, like it's not like you sit in discomfort and you torture yourself in a place of discomfort.
Right.
You know,
you're not holding your breath.
Right.
Oh, that's what we tend to do. We like our breath when we're stressed, we shorten our breath, or we even like unknowingly hold our breath.
Yeah. And so from a breath worker perspective, that's your resistance to experiencing a kind of life that you don't want. So if you just think about it, when you hold your breath, 9 times out of 10, really 10 times out of 10, it's an experience of life that you don't want to have, right? You're going to take the garbage out and it's smelly. So you hold your breath because you don't want to really experience that.
Yeah.
Or like maybe you have to fire somebody or have a difficult conversation. You're going to hold your breath before you go into that situation.
Yeah.
Because it's like not a situation you're excited to embrace and like get all into.
Right.
But if you can learn, right, to breathe in those moments of discomfort, right, and allow yourself to feel what is there, then the waveform expresses and dissipates. And you have more space and more presence and clarity. You know, that's how all that comes together so that you have the capacity to experience more life.
Yeah. And it's getting to that clarity that exposes those things and allows us to work through those areas of discomfort.
That is correct. 100%. But you have to be able to, you know, having the tools is helpful. It's not just sitting in the discomfort, right? Like I tell people, like, if you don't have the tools, like, I'm not going to force you to like torture yourself.
No, that's a very important point. That's a very important point. You've got to have tools.
You have to have tools. So you have to have breath work. You have to have some kind of energy work, some kind of reflective practice, some kind of movement practice that allows you to feel this discomfort and be with the discomfort and allow that to move and change and shift. It's not just tolerating the discomfort or we tolerate a lot of pain in our culture. We are entrained to like pain is good, right? No pain,
no gain. Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so that just leads to a lot of discomfort.
Yes.
And
with
injury and harm because it's not a tool.
Right.
And so you need the tool to go along to process.
Yeah. And I think, you know, that's a really good point because we have coping mechanisms in the world and then we have tools. And our coping mechanisms, you need to start looking at, that's for me. I had to look at my coping mechanism. I'm like, is that healthy? or not. And also recognizing, okay, that coping mechanism served me for a time. I needed that to get through that particular situation. But my nervous system needs to know that I don't need that anymore. I'm safe now, or I'm not in that scenario anymore. So we can move on for that. So what's a new tool that's healthy for me that I can put into place versus this coping mechanism?
Yeah. And I think there's a big distinction between conscious coping mechanisms and unconscious coping mechanisms.
For
right?
sure.
Like if you can step into a place and recognize, you know what, this is a super difficult situation. I know it's really hard. I need some support to get through it. And then I'm going to get the help I need to really process and work through it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be okay with this coping mechanism for this period of time.
Yes.
Different choice than like doing the activity that's the coping unconsciously and being like, yeah, okay, well, I just did it again.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And maybe
not happen different next time.
Right. And you can't hope your way to it. You've got to actually have some tools that help you change the narrative. But yeah, because I think for me, when I started realizing these coping mechanisms that were unconscious, I didn't even until I sat down and really sat with them, like, oh, that's where that comes from. That's what that's linked to. That's what I'm doing, because you can't shift things that you aren't aware of. So,
right.
So
yeah.
that's.
It was really, so in my biofield tuning training, the tuning your bioenergetic field with tuning forks. And there was a lot of discussion around food as coping mechanisms. One of the characteristics that really resonated with me and I felt was very supportive is that we often use sugar to suppress and repress anger. And we use fats to suppress and repress loneliness. And so if you're unconsciously eating sugar or you're unconsciously eating fats, that's like a nice quick check-in to be like, oh, am I actually I have a super sugary cookie in my hand. Am I actually really angry about something? Like, did something just happen that I'm really angry about?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Am I authentically just trying to enjoy this treat that I love? Or if I'm not hungry and I'm in an emotional state and I grab that thing, hold on a minute. Do I really want this thing because I enjoy it and love the taste of it and want to enjoy that? Or am I just trying to soothe something here?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's helpful to have some of those things, like, again, tools to be like, oh, let's take a moment and reflect. Like, what else might be going on here?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's that taking a moment, because we are not in a take a moment and reflect society. We are in a boom, 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 next thing, next thing, next thing. And that stopping and pausing piece. We get very uncomfortable with the pause, the silence, all those things. But it's that stopping and pausing where you can give yourself an opportunity to really step back for a minute and think about what you're about to do, that choice, what it's linked to is very valuable if we're willing to do it.
And just as, back to energetic self-care and emotional self-care, when you're going at that kind of quick speed all the time, right?
Yeah.
Your energetic system actually doesn't have the ability to process all of that, right?
It's overloaded.
You're overloaded. And so you get to the end of the day and you're fried, you don't have the capacity, you don't have the bandwidth to be present with whatever is happening, And so taking those pauses throughout the day, taking a pause at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, just to even allow your system to self-regulate,
Sure.
and process what's happened, that is just so valuable to day-to-day maintenance, in my opinion.
Yeah. Give your system a chance to catch up.
Right. Right.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
In living out feel, finding empowerment, embracing layers, how does this affect the quality of your relationships? And we've touched on this a little bit already. In terms of how we feel about ourselves, it has a direct reflection on how we interact with others and the kind of relationships we allow or don't allow in our lives. So talk to me about how you feel about that. No pun intended.
I mean, for me, I always find that it dramatically changes relationships, and definitely in my world. And perhaps the biggest thing is that me allowing my emotions, my sensations, my feeling, my intuition, it allows me to give everybody grace and understanding and feeling theirs, and so it just becomes so much easier to be like, yeah, it's okay. Like, don't, you're 10 minutes late. No big deal. Whatever the things are, it's just so easy to be much more accepting because it's not a reflection of you, right? Right. Like you're comfortable in who you are, you're taking care of your needs. So, it's very understandable if somebody else has something come up or has a struggle or needs some time to process a situation that just happened or is upset about a situation. If you allow your own emotions, it becomes easier to just let everybody else allow theirs, right? Like, sure. Well, of course. Yeah.
Absolutely.
You have a right to be angry. It's fine. Be angry. You're a human, right?
Yeah. Yes. No.
It doesn't mean it doesn't have to be taken on. And so in the same respect, that's a place of boundary setting, right? Where it's one thing where somebody is having their own emotional experience and just needs space and some compassion and a little empathy to allow them to process through it, right? It's a whole nother thing when somebody emotionally throws up on you, right? And so as a boundary setting, when I understand what my situation is, what my energy is, what my emotions are, I can be like, you know what? That's not on me. That's on you. So I'm going to, we're going to separate at this place so that you can go take care of you. And I'm going to keep myself, in a safe space. Yeah. Right. And respected. Yeah. So it becomes easier to do that as well, is what I find. And certainly the quality of my personal relationships is just so vastly different and allows for so much growth and so much beauty and so much love and so much acceptance. It's just a way I prefer to live, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I always think about it is if you are unable to embrace your layers and those parts about yourself, it's very difficult to do that for other people. True. Because you just don't have the capacity for, the empathy and understanding. So, but also remembering too, it's not your responsibility to process other people's emotions for them. You can show up and be a support, but being mindful of it's what our responsibilities are. And that we don't cross over those lines of taking on too much codependent relationships, those kinds of things.
Right.
And that people not expect us to, because I think sometimes when you've shown up that way previously and you make a shift, you're like, wait a minute, I'm learning better to love myself well and the kinds of things that are the kind of people I want to surround myself in, the kind of relationships and energies that it requires that communication. And sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't. And then you've got to make those decisions based on what's healthiest for you. We are down to the rapid fire. Name 5 activities that nourish you.
So gardening, walking, meditation, cooking, and talking with inspirational people. I love hearing people's hopes and dreams.
Yeah. That's one of mine too. That's part of why I love these conversations. It's just so invigorating for me to have them and be able to share them. I love that so much. All right. 5 words on how you want to feel the next 6 months.
Alive, inspired, hopeful, connected, and wealthy. And by wealthy, I mean like feeling the rich fabric of life.
I like that definition of wealthy. I think we need to take that one on more because that's where the contentment is. That's where the peace lies. There's so many people that have all the money in the world and they're miserable. And we
Correct.
hear that, but it's true. And so I love that definition of wealth. I think that's really powerful. Dana, thank you so much. I've loved this conversation. I knew I would. I'm so invigorated by what you do and how you present and show up in the world. Embracinglayers.com, people, that's where you're going to go. And to find out more about Dana, how you can get access to these resources, learn more about her and what we talked about today. Dana, thank you so much for your time today. Do you want to share anything real quick that we talked about? Is there anything you want to wrap up with before we end today?
I just want to say I'm so appreciative for the conversation and the invitation. And I'm so excited that you have a body of listeners who is embracing this curiosity and embracing this kind of challenge and new way of walking in the world. It does take courage. Does not always feel easy for sure, but the other side is a life that is more rich and more beautiful and more expansive than you could ever imagine. So it is worth it.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's a perfect way to wrap up. All right. Yes, I hope that feels inspiring to you. If this is a journey you're just starting or you're in the middle of and you just needed some encouragement, but thanks so much for being with us and have a great week.